And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the 2024 Black Friday edition of the Africa Impact Matters series podcast. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Good evening. Welcome to the show tonight. Well, Black Friday, of course, is probably the focus of most economic activity. I mean, even Reuters was talking about market trading in the US down, not just because it's sort of a long weekend with their Thanksgiving holiday, but because literally everybody is shopping. And there's been, depending on how you see it, but one or two sort of hints at how the retail sector is looking. A bit of a recovery from SPAR's results yesterday. Everyone talking about Boxer, even Pepkor having a good week. That was out earlier in the week on Monday. Other suggestions, in fact, Mr. Price, of course, last week, all showing that our retail sector seems to be seeing, dare I use the phrase, some green shoots. And one wonders if at the end of today, as people are sort of totting things up, and I don't know when the end of the shopping day today is. Is it midnight? Is it 8 p.m. in some shopping centres? Is it 6 o'clock for others? That what kind of day they will have. And Black Friday can indicate many, many things. But one of the things it could indicate is the health in our retail sector and the health of our consumer. I was fascinated to learn a little bit more, and we'll talk more about this in a few minutes, about how intense the war for keywords in online advertising is. And I mean, you know this. When you go online, you go into Google or whatever it is, and you search running shoes, what do you get? And obviously, people have bought, the first hits that you get. But people are also buying each other's competitors' names. I found that fascinating. And you kind of like to think that if you own Grootes shoes, that no one else can own the keyword Grootes shoes. That's not how it works, of course, in the real world. And just shows you how intense it is. And then, of course, Temu and Shein are behind it to an extent as well. And I realize that people kind of blame them for everything at the moment. I do wonder how that sort of disruption is going. Either way, as people tot up the numbers today, I think it's already going to be very interesting just to see how big this Black Friday has been. We'll find out a bit more in a moment about the South African Financial Sector Competitive Task Force, known as Operation Phumelela. And then also, of course, just keeping an eye on the stock market. Boxer up 5.5% on the day after a very strong debut yesterday. Your thoughts on Black Friday? Consumerism run amok, the beginning of the end of civilization as we know it, or a sort of glorious capitalist fiesta? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. And of course, voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, that announcement this morning, a group of leaders in our financial services industry creating what's going to be called a South African Financial Sector Competitiveness Task Force, actually going to be called Operation Phumelela. The group says they'll try and work together, help the ability of our capital markets to grow the economy and create jobs. And it's a group of heavy hitters. It includes the chairs or CEOs or MDs of Bowman's, Remgro, PSG Capital, ENS, Nedbank, Savka, and Old Mutual. The convener of Operation Phumelela is Dr. Stuart Theoldbald, the chairman of the consultancy Kruthamabout. Stuart, good evening to you. What is the aim of this task force? What are you planning to do?
Stephen, it's really about improving the ability of the South African financial sector to compete as a regional financial hub. So, in other words, to be able to offer capital markets and related financial service to investors across the world to invest into the rest of Africa. Now, South Africa has long positioned itself as the most sophisticated financial market on the continent, and to a large extent it still is, but it's been losing market share. Other centers, Dubai, Mauritius, newer centers like Nairobi, Rwanda, have come into the market with very compelling offerings to attract fund managers, investors, and others to domicile in those locations. And South Africa has been losing some traction as a result. And it's really a missed opportunity for the country to benefit from its level of development and create jobs, growth, and export earnings, because selling financial services to the rest of the world is a form of services exports. So real opportunities that the task force is aiming to gain for the country.
So, I mean, how do we regain that traction? What do we need to do to compete with Dubai and Rwanda and places like that clearly, in some ways, seem to be a little ahead of us at the moment?
There's a mix of sort of regulatory interventions as well as development on the industry side. So to give you an example, one area where we have struggled to gain traction is to use our capital markets as forums for investors and issuers to raise capital. And there have been various attempts to change that. So, for example, the notion of inward listings, which allows companies in the rest of Africa, in fact, anywhere in the world, to list on the JSE and raise capital. However, they're only able to raise that capital in rand. And if you think about their needs, it's clearly for hard currency or other currency cash that they can use to invest in their operations and to grow. Whereas other jurisdictions, Mauritius or Dubai, for example, you can list in dollars and raise hard currency for your investments. So it just means that South Africa is on the back foot in a very simple way in not being able to list hard currency assets. So that's one example. And if we think about the way the South African financial ecosystem works, there are many such issues that, if they were addressed, would improve the ability of investors to use South Africa as an opportunity to back investment opportunities in the rest of the continent. And we really want to see those opportunities now being leveraged to support growth in the country.
This is the idea of a sort of task force or a group of people working together. It's been done in other places. London's a good example. I mean, you're looking at those examples. Have they worked? I mean, have they actually made a difference?
Well, London is a good one to mention. After Brexit really undermined the competitiveness of the City of London as a financial hub for the whole of Europe and emerging markets, in effect, the industry got together to have a look at what it could do within that changed context to try and regain some competitive momentum. And it's led to many engagements between the industry and its regulators, and several changes in how things operate. So there have been major overhauls All
right, we seem to have lost Dr. Stuart Theoldbald there. Was talking to us, of course, I think, and obviously just having that conversation around the task force. We will try and get back with him because there are several other questions that we'd like to try and ask him, particularly around the sentiment, if the change in sentiment and the timing. And I'm very curious about the timing of all of this. Obviously, a lot's happening. There's been a real change in sentiment in different ways since the formation of the coalition. So I do want to ask about that as well. Don't forget that conversation around the new intensity, it would seem, in online keyword. All right. I think we're going to speak to Stuart Theoldbald in a different way and just get him to continue that conversation on the phone, rather, which we think is going to be a better way, in fact, to do it. So let's just see if we're able to do that. In fact, I think he's going to be with us now. There he is. Stuart Theoldbald, sorry about that. We were talking about the London example. You were suggesting that after Brexit, London's capital markets needed some kind of intervention, and the industry got together and did that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it worked closely with the regulators. And we've seen during that time a lot of changes in how the city operates. So changes to listing rules on the London Stock Exchange, for example, some efforts to mobilize domestic savings from pension funds to support liquidity on the exchange. So all of those, it's very much a work in progress. But what is unique about the way financial sectors operate is that you have an industry in whose interest it is to have good regulation. So financial systems are different to many other industries in that respect because it depends so much on confidence of clients, and good regulation is a key competitive advantage for a financial sector. So that's why generally it is very positive for an industry and its regulators to work closely together in charting a course for its development. And we're hoping to emulate that in South Africa. And indeed, South Africa has long had a good relationship between the industry and National Treasury and key regulators like the SARB and the financial, the Fiscus. So there is now, I think, an opportunity for us to all work together to turn the dials and fix the plumbing to ensure that the ecosystem is able to really offer a compelling and competitive service to the rest of the world. I think, Stephen, another element that I think the industry is very conscious of is, as exchange control has been relaxed over the last 30 years, you've seen a significant externalization of savings from the country. Now, that is in many ways positive for savers because it enables them to diversify risk and access new sources of return. But it has meant that the industry has lost its key asset, which is the savings that it's able to manage. And it's really an artifact of the way exchange control relaxation was done. So firms themselves were restricted from managing the foreign savings of South Africans, effectively forcing South Africans to turn to firms in the rest of the world to manage their offshore savings for them. And that has been an artifact of decisions made long ago in how exchange control is done, but it's had a very unintended consequence of restricting the development of the onshore savings industry. Had it been done differently by saying that savers can, subject to a limit, gain foreign exposure, but having allowed South African firms to manage that foreign exposure on their behalf, we would have been in a much better position today in terms of the assets that the industry actually manages. And part of the ambition here is to reverse some of that damage. So to ensure that we enable South African capital markets and fund managers and investment banks and so on to create and then manage offshore assets that onshore savers and investors can use. And once you've done that, you have a critical mass that you can then market to investors across the world. And there is a huge industry of cross-border investment going on, some $60 trillion that is managed on behalf of investors from one country into another country. And South Africa's really been missing in action in that $60 trillion industry because exchange control has prevented South African fund managers from setting up funds that they can intermediate with between investors who are offshore and assets which are offshore. So we can't have our excellent fund management industry in Cape Town, for example, running a global fund on behalf of investors in the US and Europe from Cape Town. They've had to domicile themselves in locations all over the world and set up infrastructure and manage funds from there, simply because of the way regulations are framed for onshore fund management.
Dr. Stuart Theoldbald, thank you very much indeed. The convener of Operation Phumelela, also chairman of the consultancy Kruthamabout.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
So I presume that you or someone in your family might have made a few purchases today. You might have spent some time online, maybe in a shop yourself. Maybe you just opened your bank app and watched the rest of the family do it. It being Black Friday, of course, one of the busiest retail days of the year. One of the key elements behind it now is how online advertising works. I'm sure you already know this. When you go into Google and you type in clothing, for example, the first hits that you get are paid for. In other words, companies pay Google to be the first hit that you get for the word clothing. Well, something seems to have shifted in this world, and particularly this week. Arthur Goldstruck, the founder of World Wide Worx. Arthur, good evening. Okay, I realize search engines make money from advertising. The business is about keywords and selling keywords. It does seem that this business is getting a lot more intense suddenly, and in fact, people are buying competitors' keywords as much as they can.
Good evening, Stephen. It's very apparent this year because of the heavy competition in South Africa between the likes of Temu and Shein and Amazon and Takealot. But it's in fact been going on for many years, ever since search advertising began, really. And Google, in a way, encourages it. They make it legal, illegal in their terms, to buy competitor keywords. But what they don't allow is to use those keywords in one's own advertising. So Temu can, for example, buy a Amazon.co keyword or a Shein keyword, but they can't use it in their actual ads, their text ads, or the addresses of the sites to which they're attracting people. So there is that nuance, but in effect, if you get in first and you're willing to outbid the owner of a keyword, you can actually use their keyword for searching. So someone types in Shein, for example, and the results that come up in their search results will start with a Temu result. So in that way, it seems completely unethical, but at the same time, there's no law against it.
And I mean, the only person who could impose a law would probably be Google, which is not really a country.
Precisely. Precisely.
The ads for these words and the words themselves, the keywords, I suppose, they must become really expensive. And I mean, some people will just be priced out of the market.
They do. But the most expensive ones are generic terms like, for example, women's clothes or just shirts or a T-shirt or something like that. Anything that's completely generic and is a category that a lot of people will be searching for. That becomes exceptionally expensive. Then not far behind that comes the major brand names, like let's say Apple or Samsung would be incredibly expensive keywords. There was actually a very funny example some years ago where Samsung themselves, in fact, placed or bought the keywords for an Apple phone. And when people clicked through on the link, the heading, or at least the search results, when they did the search results said, awkward, you obviously meant S6 and not iPhone 6. So it was that kind of strategy, and Google encourages it because it increases the bidding price for those keywords, and it generates more revenue for them.
I mean, it does also reduce trust, though. I mean, as always online, you don't know what you know, you don't know what you're sort of dealing with half the time. Everyone wants to grow online commerce, sure, but this is not going to encourage that at all.
There's no question about it. It's ironic that Google goes to great lengths to show that it's a good citizen, a corporate citizen, a country citizen. They do incredible work across Africa, and then when it comes to their search strategy, they completely undermine that by what appear to be unethical activities.
I sometimes wonder, I mean, if you look at what's happening with Shein and Temu online, they're both very aggressive, nothing wrong with that. I mean, they're sticking within the rules that they are. I do wonder sometimes if someone's ever going to come along and disrupt them too, because they do seem to be, and particularly clothing, online commerce is a kind of in a disruptive phase at the moment. Yes, it's been around for a while, but something does seem to be shifting.
Well, what you find at the moment is that one can get the same kind of deals that these guys punt as being the cheapest in the market if you shop around. And with specific categories of goods, they can't compete. I saw an ad on Amazon.co.za today for the iPhone 15 top-of-the-range phone at about 25% or 20% off the regular price in stores. And that is something that you just cannot get on these low-cost global platforms. You have to know what you're looking for, though. You have to want to have bought that in the first place, and then you go looking for bargains. And that's primarily what's driving this year's Black Friday sales, for example. It's not so much that people are just buying anything that's thrown at them. People are looking for what they were looking for in the first place. And when they find it, they buy it. And today, especially, we've seen massive volumes of traffic on e-commerce sites, in stores as well. But you see it mostly through the credit card transactions and the amount of transactions going through payment gateways.
I mean, when advertising started, so if we say, let's just for argument's sake say with the launch of sort of commercial newspapers, so 200 years ago, right, people wouldn't have known what this is. They would have thought that this is a statement of fact, or they would have thought the news story is advertising, because a lot of newspapers at the time had the advertiser. They were called the advertiser firstly, but they had the advertising on the front page. And then people got more and more cynical and learned how to deal with advertising. And I wonder if the same thing from what you say is beginning to happen with online advertising. You kind of know Google's not giving you the best thing for you. They're giving you the best thing for Google.
I believe that is happening, and you're seeing it with Black Friday deals as well. There's a wonderful meme going around that shows a guy looking at the price a month ago. It says $4.99. He looks at it a week ago, it says $4.99. He looks at it today, Black Friday, it says $6.99 crossed out, and below that's $4.99. And that's what everyone is assuming is the case, for example, with Black Friday deals. They are becoming savvy, and they are also a lot more careful about how they spend their money that is now so much harder to make.
I mean, and I suppose all of this also just tells you a story about how much has changed. I mean, online shopping probably wouldn't really work if the banks didn't back it, if there wasn't such a thing as credit card. What you really have is a whole set of technologies that are coming together and a whole set of sort of media ideas and advertising ideas that are coming together. And people are now benefiting in a big way because obviously they have much more access to products that they wouldn't have had before. And we've seen in South Africa, First Take a Lot, now Amazon, that essentially that competition should in the longer run be good for everyone.
There's no question about that. And that's the reason why our online research or online retail research that we release every year is showing consistently growth of about 25 to 30% a year in total online retail. I've been following today an online dashboard from a company called eCentric, a payment gateway that processes credit card transactions online and in stores. And it's been astonishing to see consistently through the day, firstly, how high the transaction volumes have been. But the most interesting thing about the dashboard is comparing last year's data with this year's data. So total transaction value is 50% up on last year of what's going through the gateway. And then when you look at transaction volume, it's up by just over 50%. And the graphs are just startling and staggering to see the extent of growth on this particular day. Doesn't mean that overall online retail is growing at that level, but the extent to which people are finding what they want on Black Friday is an indication of growth of spending the online space.
Arthur Goldstruck, thanks very much indeed, founder of World Wide Worx. Really do appreciate the time. It does show you how much has changed and what is changing. In a moment, Friday File, we'll be looking at cloth and a particular type of cloth that really does give you a luxurious feel. We'll be looking at that. Don't forget the Friday Biz Blitz. Just a note, I do know that, of course, normally at this stage we do market commentary. Unfortunately, a technical issue on that. Sorry about that.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Don't forget in a few moments the Friday Biz Blitz. A couple of questions about what happened on the stock exchange. There's one about porridge. There's another. Yes, we really do have a question about porridge on the Money Show. I'm not making it up. We will also talk about a particular cathedral. But 011 8830 702 021 446 0567. The Friday Biz Blitz in a few moments.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
So imagine that you are interested in clothing and that you want to compete as a fashion designer. You want to sell your clothes. You want them to stand out. There are lots of ways you can do it. There are literally 1 million people who design clothes probably around the world. I just use that figure off the top of my head, but I'm sure I could justify it if I had to. Well, one way to compete is actually in the cloth that you use. And someone who uses the cloth in one way as part of her competitive advantage is Rina Chunga, founder of Rich Factory. And she particularly makes clothes using what's often described as African print. Rina Chunga, good evening. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. I suppose there are an infinite variety of clothing designs. What stands out for you is what you use actually as the cloth. How did you start?
Hey, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me this evening. Happy to have a chat. How did I use the cloth? So I grew up on this cloth. I call it chitenge. It's actually the traditional fabric of Zambia, and I was born in Zambia. My father is Zambian. So that's just the fabric that we always had laying around the house. There's always just so much of it to use. So naturally, when I started sewing, that's what I got to learn on, and it really kind of just fell into place.
It does. I mean, it shouldn't stand out, but it kind of does. I mean, it's a useful competitive advantage for you, isn't it?
It definitely is a great competitive advantage, but I think more so in how I use it. I suppose if I was in my home country of Zambia, it wouldn't be so unique. But against so much of the other fabric that we have here, because obviously South Africa just has so many different traditions to choose from, it does give me that competitive edge. And given that I've been using the fabric my whole life, I understand it a little bit better. So it wouldn't make sense for me to maybe come in here and do something closer that I don't actually understand as well. I do my own materials.
I mean, we spoke to Tsepo Mogala earlier this week. He specializes in denim, and denim clearly speaks to him. I mean, you can see it from what he's wearing. You can see it from the way that he talks about it. You have your own relationship with this cloth, don't you?
I do. And I think that's kind of what makes us all very special as designers, is having your own relationship with different fabrics. So this is a statement that I get from people all the time. They'll say, oh, you mix your prints differently, but this is just because I think of it as an art medium, so to speak. So just like an artist makes things out of paint, for me it's out of those African fabrics, and the way that I match them up is unique to the next person.
So when you work out, you have an idea in your head, and I suppose, I mean, it's a ridiculous question. Where do the ideas come from? But what sort of inspires you, I suppose? You will have cloth, you'll have bits of it around. You need to design a new thing. Does inspiration just strike you in the shower? Or do you find that actually, you sit down and think, I'm now going to design? I mean, can you design like that?
Definitely. I mean, I went and I studied, so yes, I can turn it on, Sometimes your brain, you can just kind of turn on that intellectual brain and be like, I'm going to design. But with me, it does happen more so organically if I see a print and then the print just inspires something. But this has been hard in this season. So I know it's strange, but our African fabrics actually come from China. And ever since the pandemic, it's been very hard to actually import the fabrics in. So I'm always kind of left with a little bit less to be able to use. So I've had to become even more so creative than I ever did like before, when I would just find a fabric and then the fabric would inspire that. Now I have the designs and I really have to think about how can I make the best of this and how can it work.
You started, I think you were working from home at first and you were clothing certain people. I mean, people who had quite a high profile in a way. How did that start? I mean, that must have been very useful for you.
It was. It really was. So how it actually started was I started styling. I was in the styling business, and as any smart designer would do, they'll style the celebrities in their own clothes, because if that's on a TV show or that's in a newspaper or a magazine, it's free publicity for you, right? So that's what I started doing. I would just have the celebrities in my own clothes, and this really blew up. I guess the times were just perfect. There was this kind of renaissance happening with African fashion, and the celebrities I was dressing at the time were very much trying to find a unique look within the media. So that was also very different for them. And yeah, it all worked out in that way. So then I started at home, but I was at home for years. I think everybody thinks I blew up overnight, but I literally started my business in 2007 when I finished matric, and I worked in different places, but from home until 2016. And then that's when I moved into a shop in Parkers. So that's almost a 10-year gap between home and store. Yeah. And then I had the store from 2016 until last year. And I closed down for a couple of months just to kind of discover what I want to do. And then reopened last month. Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to use celebrities to get attention. Sometimes they can be a little difficult, Rena. I mean,
yeah.
So I'm told. I mean, there must be one or two stories, no names here.
No names, but I actually stopped for a while. So I think everybody does think that the best thing you can do in a business is to have celebrities wear your clothes. I think it was about maybe 2018 where I consciously made a decision to stop dressing celebrities, but this was very much a business decision because it was kind of alienating my everyday clients. They felt like they couldn't access the brand because it made it out of reach. And yeah, that it was just more for a certain price market that it wasn't. So I had to say, while this looks nice, it's not actually the best decision for the face of my brands to be celebrities. So yeah, I did take a step back from that as well.
So you've also got to be careful perhaps with how many you create, right? If you come across a design, you design something. I mean, do you make 500? Do you make 5? There's that sort of line between mass and exclusivity.
Absolutely. So over the last 2 years, I've really gone from like rebranding and changing my brand positioning. So at first I said, okay, it's a contemporary brand. And then I went to a luxury brand. And then I came back to a premium brand. And that's just also come from how many of these can I make? What price point do I want? And how much do I want to mass produce? Because that's something that I keep going back and forth with. Like, do we want to do 100?
Rena, you still there?
It always, and I've tried many different things, and I'm falling now into the place where I've found what's more comfortable. I think in this sort of iteration of my business, I'm looking at legacy and how can I build something that's going to stand the test of time. And for me, that has come to where I've built my brand into a premium brand, and then maybe we're doing definitely no more than 30 of one product, and these are going all over the world. So that still gives us that exclusivity as well with our clients, where they know that if they're buying something, it's very, it's premium. They are one of the few people that actually have that garment on the planet.
And if you have fewer than 30, I mean, that exclusivity is pretty much guaranteed. I mean, what would be the next step from you? So you sort of, moved into the shop, you're feeling a bit comfortable about the kind of level of where things are. I mean, obviously, we all want to take over the planet, but we really only want to take over our section of it, Rena. I mean, is there a particular sort of goal or hope that you have that comes from where you are now? I mean, you've had them seen in different places, so you kind of tick. What's next?
Yeah, so when I began closing down my business previously, because I began in 2022, it's because I had done this massive expansion. So I did a massive expansion. I got a huge factory. I got a studio space, and I was like, we're going global. This is what we're doing. We're going to put our stuff in factories in the US, and then people can just ship from there and all of that. And what it turned out is that it was just too huge for me. It was too huge. I mean, when you're doing a business, I think everybody just says, bigger, bigger, bigger. What's next? And I did that, and I was completely overwhelmed. So now that I've reopened, I still want to take the brand global, but much more strategically. So we are going into resort boutiques. So people can travel the world and interact with my brand, but they will find it at a resort, in a boutique, or at an airport somewhere, at a kiosk, not necessarily these huge retail shops and all of that come with the rent and that come with all of those things. So now it's about scaling, but much more with a sense of intention. Because like you said, you do want to take over, but your section of the world, you don't really need it to be what everybody else would define as success. Because for me, I really want the spirit of these African clothes to travel all over the world and to have that identity all over the world. It doesn't mean that 10,000 people need to wear it around in London. But if one person goes on holiday to Kenya and then picks up a dress and takes it back to London, that's a win for me.
Also, I mean, you're deliberately associating yourself with good times. And I mean, flying hasn't been glamorous for a long time. But I mean, just the sense of it is a huge thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a big part of the inspiration for the brand, is that the products bring people joy. And where are people more joyful than when on vacation?
Yeah. Rena, thank you very much. Really enjoyed talking to you. Rena Chunga is the founder of Rich Factory.
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011-883-0702.
Let's start with Suhail in Centurion. Suhail, which retail giant listed on the JSE?
Pick and Pay Boxer.
Yeah, Boxer. I'll give it to you, Suhail. It is, of course, Boxer. Comes out of Pick and Pay. And, of course, they did very well in the first 2 days of trading, up 5.5% today. Okay, Suhail, you ready for the second question? Here we go. Which two countries, there's a little bit of a trick to this question. It's about the U.S. trade tariffs. Which two countries are expected to face import tariffs of 25% if they want to import into the U.S. after Donald Trump's comments this week? Which two countries, so he mentioned three, but which two countries would face tariffs of 25%?
I think Mexico and Canada.
It is Mexico and Canada, yes. And China would be an extra 10% on tariffs they already pay. Okay, so Hale, here we go. Third question on the Friday Biz Blitz. Which country wants to introduce or is set to introduce a national ban on social media for people under the age of 16?
Australia.
It is Australia. And frankly, I don't support Australia in much, but I support them in this. This is after the law passed the Senate, the upper house of Parliament in Australia this week. Okay, here we go. Next question. Which satellite internet service is being grounded in Namibia? It's been told it can't operate in Namibia.
Starlink.
Sorry, say that. What did you say?
Starlink.
Starlink. Okay, I think the questions are a little too easy this time around. Which malted drink or porridge is being discontinued? And I remember the taste from when I was a kid. Sahel, which malted drink or porridge is being discontinued?
Mortabella.
Yeah, Sahel, you've been listening very closely here, eh? I thought that might be the one that would trip you up. But yeah, it is Mortabella. Okay, sure. Running out of questions for you here. Okay, last question. Which historic European landmark, partially destroyed by fire 5 years ago, is going to reopen in December?
Notre Dame.
Jeez. Sahel, congratulations. Yes, it is Notre Dame. You're a winner. You've won the Friday Biz Blitz. Sahel, congratulations, man. Your prize for the week, of course, is to tell everyone that you won.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Sahel on the line from Centurion. Sure. Okay. Did better than we expected there. Did very, very well indeed. So, yeah, well done to Sahel for that. It is, of course, the Notre Dame Cathedral. And I remember the moment that, you saw the pictures for the first time of it actually on fire 5 years ago. And now the French President, Emmanuel Macron, saying that it'll give the world a shock of hope is the way that he has described that. Okay, so those were the questions on the Friday Biz Blitz. A little quicker than usual because normally you find that actually no one gets all of them right. Sort of looking at the person who wrote the questions and I think she's wondering to herself, do I need to be a little tougher next time? Maybe, kind of finding that balance can be quite tricky. I must say, the Mortabella one was the one that I thought not everyone's going to get that. It's had some publicity this week, but not a huge amount. I thought, I'm not so sure if everyone's going to get that one. But anyway, that is just how it goes. All right, plenty to come in the next little while. And of course, we'll take you through what's been happening through the week. And of course, it's really been, as you know, a very, very busy week. And if you look ahead to next week, I get the sense that the last 2 weeks of this year, the last two sort of big kind of trading weeks before we all go on holiday, actually has a lot more news to come. Some of it's been driven by what's happening in the White House. A lot of it's been driven by what's happening on our stock market. So, of course, there'll be a lot more to come on all of that, and we'll be watching all of that closely. You're with The Money Show. Good evening.